We begin with Alberta and the firewall it's building against the federal government. Daniel Smith's government has tabled a bill that would allow it to block funding deals between Ottawa and Alberta municipalities.
We are taking back more of our jurisdictional control and telling Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his cabinet that they cannot make deals without our express approval. Through this legislation, which signals that Alberta will act to ensure the Constitution's integrity and that we won't put up with any further manipulation or political interference from Ottawa.
The only federal cabinet minister from Alberta says this kind of legislation will slow down agreements and keep money out of communities.
Roadblocks and obstacles in that way, getting in the way of that funding is only going to hurt Albertans. I think we respect those jurisdictions, but we're not going to sit at the sidelines and wait for provinces to act when Canadians want us to do new programs.
For the municipality's perspective on this, we've reached Jyoti Gondek, the Mayor of Calgary, and she joins me now. Mayor Gondek, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
What effect do you think this new legislation will have on Calgary getting funding from the federal government?
I think it stands to create more red tape, create slowdowns in approvals, and honestly cost more money for all Albertans as we have another order of government sifting through agreements. So I think it's going to slow things down at a time when our city is seeing growth in the neighborhood of 60 people a day moving here. We need to get housing built, we need to improve infrastructure, and we are relying on federal funding for that. And we need to expedite processes, not put up barriers to them.
Okay, so this doesn't just apply, though, to new agreements going forward. It's also looking a bit backwards. I mean, what's your reaction to the fact that the provincial government has flagged hundreds of existing agreements and described them as problematic?
I would love to have some sort of reaction to that, but my only reaction is I have no idea what they flagged as problematic. I don't know what their criteria for problematic is. I don't know if Calgary is one of the 800. I don't actually know anything. There's not enough information for me to be able to weigh in.
Okay, so if any of your existing federal provincial agreements are a problem here, nobody has told you anything, and I guess uncertainty like that is not helpful when you're trying to plan.
Yeah, uncertainty and unpredictability are the last thing we need right now. We are a city that has recovered from an incredible downturn. We went through the pandemic and we are slowly coming back to our full potential. We are the economic driver. We're the economic engine, not only for our province, but also for our country. And so in order to be able to generate economic benefit for the nation and our province, we need to be able to strike deals and have grants and funding coming from the federal government so that we can keep our city strong and make sure that the hard-earned tax dollars that are leaving our city are actually returning here for investment into our communities.
So your city has a deal with the federal government, as I understand, if I'm remembering correctly, under the Housing Accelerator Fund. Do you have any idea what this legislation could mean for that agreement?
I don't know what it could mean for that agreement. I don't know what it could mean for any agreements for any of our municipalities or our school boards or our post-secondary institutions. There's frankly very little information for us to weigh in on. And that's why many of us are raising the flag that this is problematic. To table legislation and then say you're going to do a consultation should have probably been the other way around. So I'm as curious as you are about what's been flagged and what's deemed problematic. And frankly, what are the priorities of the province?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how this might intersect with what we're seeing from the federal government, because they've been rolling out programs in advance of the budget. As you know, one of their big pre-budget announcements includes a municipal infrastructure fund, essentially, with strings attached for the provinces to get that funding if they meet certain conditions, and if they don't, it flows around them and it goes to municipalities. If Daniel Smith's government is going to put conditions like this in the way, and there's an inability for the Alberta government and the federal government to work together, but then they can't go to municipalities and cut deals with mayors like you because of this legislation, that means potentially Calgary, Edmonton, where the UCP has no representation, could get cut out of these billions of dollars.
I mean, I think it's important to remember that the billions of dollars that are being put forward by the federal government are accessible to any municipality. And so, when we hear a statement like Calgary is receiving money, but we need to make sure that everybody else is getting their fair share, I will tell you that mayors like me from across this country fought hard for 2.5 years with the federal government, telling them that they weren't investing enough in municipalities. And we finally got to a point where they've announced $6 billion just last week. That's because we put up such a fuss in the name of every municipality who now has access to this money. So we've been doing exactly what the province is saying they're doing. We're fighting for our fair share. And in fact, we've advocated for all municipalities, not just ours.
So how do you think this could play out, though? I mean, as you say, there is a lot of things we don't know about this particular piece of legislation. But Premier Smith, it seems pretty intent on pushing back against what she considers to be federal intrusion into her jurisdiction. She likes to cite examples of comparable legislation that we've seen in Quebec. But it seems as though, with the parameters laid out in this budget announcement by the federal government, if she does this, and if Daniel Smith won't agree to making fourplexes as of right everywhere, for example, in Alberta, and then blocks you from signing an agreement with the federal government, you're just not going to get the cash. Calgary becomes completely at the mercy of the provincial government here.
Well, yes. And I mean, I think there's something important to consider in all of this. We as municipalities, and my city in particular, has been put squarely in the middle of a debate that is between the provincial and federal governments. They are at ideological war with each other, and they are identifying things that they don't like about each other's philosophies. And for them to enter into this kind of a battle and put cities at the mercy of, their whims is absolutely unacceptable. I mean, we were elected to represent our constituents, and Calgarians expect me to be fighting for the dollars that they put out in income tax to be coming back to us. And that's exactly what I've done together with other mayors. And to now hear that our province wants to block the ability to get much needed funding makes no sense to me. You use the Quebec example. In the Quebec example, Quebec has agreed to match the funding.
Right.
So if that's something that our province wants to do, I'd be happy to hear about it.
Well, no, this is the thing. A lot of the premiers say they want the Quebec agreement, but Quebec brings its own money to the table when in a lot of cases the provincial governments have not, outside of Quebec, on things such as housing. So you have your frustration here what the provincial government is doing. Given this pushback, does the federal government need to change its approach, or does your frustration rest entirely with Premier Smith here?
My frustration rests with two orders of government who should know better. They know they need to work together, and they are letting ideologies get in the way. I mean, the federal government is going across the country making announcements, coming to Alberta, making announcements without telling me, without telling the premier. And so in some ways, they are also guilty of poking the bear. So I would love for these two orders of government to actually understand how critical it is at this point in time in our country and in my city for them to get along and make sure that we are delivering the services and the infrastructure that the people are desperately reliant on those two orders of government for.
I'm not sure these two governments will find a way to necessarily get along on some things. I mean, how do you view this? It's not a relationship. Occasionally things go well, when they're investing in net zero, industry in rural Alberta and northern Alberta. But like on sort of baseline provincial, municipal programs, there is a persistent tension here. I mean, do you think this can be resolved in time for you to take advantage of some of this cash, or does this all have to wait for a federal election to sort of clear the air here?
I really hope they can understand that the public has spoken. The public has told us that they are incredibly concerned about housing. They are incredibly concerned about public safety, and they are incredibly concerned about the economy. And as a local government, there's only so much we can do. We have made $80 million worth of investments into those things in last year's budget alone. And so I would say maybe they can take a tip from us. We're willing to do the right thing and stand up for the things that our constituents need. They need to get a handle around doing the same, and they need to put their ideologies aside.
So what happens to Calgary if they don't get this resolved and this looks to be some sort of a standoff where federal money stops at the Alberta border on some of these programs?
If the federal money does not flow to not only my city, but to all municipalities, then we become dependent on the provincial government for funding. Because the one thing about municipalities in our province, we cannot carry a deficit. So the only way that we could even begin to deliver the amount of infrastructure and services that we need their funding for is to increase property taxes. And we don't want to do that. We shouldn't have to do that. So I would implore both orders of government to understand that the money that they are playing with right now is desperately needed in municipalities, and they need to set aside their differences and do the right thing. If they want the economic engine of the province and the country to stay alive and do well, they better come up with a way to get along.
Jyoti Gondek, Mayor of Calgary, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.